Welcome, everyone. Welcome, newcomers, salonistas, to Anna and Isabel Salon. I am Marty, for those of you that don't know. I'm the founder and director of the salon, and in my day job, I am an educationalist who teaches compassion, mainly with nursing and medical students. I'm passionate about the power of compassion and how we can integrate it into curricula, into universities, into cities, into the world to transform society. And I'm really excited about tonight. So the salon, for those who are new, is a compassionate initiative. We provide a home and a warm hug around new and established authors and poets whose work relates to compassion and well-being. It is a place for us to connect, inspire and support using books and poems. And you can find lots of further details on our website, and Holly is busily putting things into the chat box as we speak. Just a few practicalities. Your microphones are muted so we can concentrate on Anna and Isabel's salon. Please feel free to put your cameras on so we can see your lovely faces, and then at the end of the conversation, feel free to write in the chat. Holly will provide lots of links and things now as Anna and Isabel are talking, and then there'll be an opportunity at the end to make comments and ask questions, and Jane will be fielding the questions at the end. The salon is recorded, so please turn your cameras off if you do not want to be filmed. So the salon is supported by Lighthouse Books in Edinburgh. It's a woman-led independent community bookshop, and they stock both our authors' books at the moment, and they have some book plates and signed copies, and they also stock most of the salon books. In fact, they have a little compassion salon corner, which is wonderful. And you can also get all our books at bookshop.org, and Holly will let you know about that in the chat. We also want to thank the Royal Society of Arts because they collaborate with us on 4 salons a year, and they also provide our online home, our Zoom home, and we're also supported by the Edinburgh University and Harriet Harris. So thank you, and everyone that's here, Jane and Holly. So to tonight's salon, Anna and Isabel are going to discuss Anna's biography, A Place for Everything, My Mother, Autism and Me, which tells the story of her mother's undiagnosed autism, speaking frankly about what life was like, about the person behind the disorder, and those big unspoken family truths, and what it means to care for our parents in their final years. So Anna has published over 50 books for children and young teens. She has been shortlisted for the Whole Libraries Award, the Lancashire Book of the Year Award, the ALCS Educational Writers Award, the Teach Primary Book Awards, and the Hampshire SLS Awards. As well as writing for young people, she has the book we're going to be discussing this evening, which has been reviewed as a seminal work in this area by the world expert in autism in women, Professor Tony Atwood. It was the editor's choice in the Bookseller magazine, where it was described as a vividly told and profoundly affecting memoir, and it was featured on BBC Woman's Hour. Anna also has extensive experience in teaching creative writing at university level and running writing workshops in schools. She is a Royal Literary Fund Fellow for Exeter University at Penryn and a tutor for the Avron Foundation, the HarperCollins Author Academy and the Writer's Block in Cornwall. Isabel Losada. So Isabel Losada. So Isabel writes books. So Isabel was the first person to introduce me through her books to compassion and how we can change the world. We'd Love to Tibet started my journey with compassion in 2004 with Isabel's adventure and exploration of the stories of Tibet, compassion, and the Dalai Lama. And her other books, she has taught me about happiness, men, sex, and now environmentalism and joy. I'm so grateful for all that. So when Isabel came to previous salon and came today and potentially in the autumn, I continue to be delighted by you, Isabel. Thank you. Isabel is a British author of narrative nonfiction. Her most recent full-length book, The Joyful Environmentalist, How to Practice Without Preaching, explores the way we heat our homes, travel, garden, dress, holiday, shop, volunteer, eat, and furnish our homes. Isabel shows that all the actions we can take in order to live a 1.5 degree lifestyle and help our planet are also those which will most enrich our lives. It is also the only book about environmentalism that makes the readers laugh and won the best overall book on sustainability 2022 at the Independent. So each salon before handing over to the authors begins with a poem. And this evening, Anna has chosen The Piece of Wild Things by Wendell Berry, which I'll now read. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. And I will pass you over to Isabel and Anna. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you. Lovely to see everyone.
What a gorgeous poem that was.
Yeah.
Well, that was a big introduction. Thank you.
It really was, yeah.
So I like to concentrate on talks like this in maximum relevance to all those of you that have been kind enough to join us. Because life is short, we've all got limited time, and you're doing us the privilege of tuning in tonight. So I want to be sure that we give you all something to go away with. I read Anna's book when it first came out, A Place for Everything, and I was completely stunned, above all, at the courage it took. It must have taken, or it felt to me like it took. In fact, it felt like it took courage even to read it, which is why I was wondering as I read it how on earth Anna had found the courage to write it and to describe her childhood being raised by an autistic mother, whilst of course at that time not realizing that the mother was autistic, because it was very unusual for women to be diagnosed, as Anna will tell you. And so I read it with increasing amazement as I went on. So I wonder, Anna, if you can just start by telling us a little bit about, I mean, it might seem a ridiculous question, but what was it like being raised by an autistic woman, and how could you really gauge it? I mean, obviously you've only been raised by one mother, so how do you feel about that? How did you feel about that then, and how do you feel about that now? And, you know, what would you say to someone who has been raised perhaps not only by not necessarily by an autistic mother, but by a mother who they experienced enormous difficulty with, say a mother that's been damaged in some other way by some other disorder, but who's been difficult for them as a mother?
It's interesting you say I've only had one experience of being mothered, because actually I was brought up by my grandmother as well. So in a way I had two mothers, and my mother relied very heavily on her mother for backup, which we now all understand is because she had a lot to deal with her autism, and my grandmother was down the road, so she could sort of pick up the pieces. But, you know, when you're a child, your family is your normal, so you don't really question it. You know, for years you just toddle along thinking, okay, well, mum gets really upset when I spill something on the carpet, and she gets really, really upset, so I'm just not going to spill anything on the carpet because I don't want her to fly into a rage or whatever. And it's not until you get to about, I would say probably in my experience, probably about 10 or 11, when I started spending more time at other friends' houses and having experience of their mothers and how their families functioned, that the questions started to form, although it probably weren't even questions, they were just sort of niggles at that point, you know, sort of thinking, that's funny, it seems to be much more relaxed in this household. I seem to be able to take jam donuts up to the bedroom and nobody seems to care, you know, things like that. So, you know, your world is very small at that age anyway, and you're not very questioning of your own family. I think the problems started to occur in my teenage years, when obviously as a teen you start to, you know, whatever family you've got, you start to push against the boundaries and you start to want to break away perhaps from your family and break the rules, whatever the rules are. And that's obviously a trying time for any family when you've got teens coming up against parents. But I think when your parent is autistic, one of the things that autistic people need is order. And
yes, so can I just ask, sorry to interrupt, but
that's okay.
And nowadays it's very in vogue for people to be described as controlling. Like everybody seems to think that their parents were controlling, or that their partners are controlling, or that their children are controlling. I mean, there's almost obsession, isn't there, with this word controlling?
Right.
So, I mean, and I would bet that, you know, the majority of the people that are listening are thinking that one or the other of their parents was definitely controlling, you know. So looking backwards, how would one differentiate between a parent that was a little bit controlling, or a parent that was controlling but was controlling because they were autistic, so they were trying to manage their desire for order, and that just comes across as controlling, or maybe they were autistic?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, particularly being a child of the 70s as I am, where, you know, most parents were stricter. I mean, I'm being very generalizing hugely, but most parents were stricter then than they are now on lots of things. So I think, and that adds to my answer of why I didn't notice things perhaps so early on. But I suppose the thing is that certainly with my mother, those controlling things became very extreme. The more I wanted or needed to grow up and break away, the more she became obsessed over things that in her mind it really was to do with keeping me safe, and also to keep things as they had always been, because it was a real struggle for her to see me and my sister grow up. So it'd be things like and again, all of these things taken out of context can sound quite small, but you know, when my sister and I went out anywhere, we were expected to call the minute we got there, the minute we were on our way back. This is in the days before mobile phones, so we were constantly searching for phone boxes to try and find the right change to phone our mother to let her know that we were on our way back. And in those days, our friends would be saying, "Why are you doing this? You know, you're out, you're having fun, you're out with us. Why are you calling your mum every 10 minutes? We've got to go and find a phone box, but we're out, you know, we can't find a phone box. We're in the middle of London," or, you know, whatever we were doing. So nowadays, the kids would probably say, "Well, I phone my mum or I text her all the time." So that kind of thing on its own might not look like very much. But then go forward a few years to when I was expecting my daughter. So I was fairly young. I was about 27, I think. Can't remember. It's such a long time ago. And mum understandably was very nervous about me giving birth. But I'm sure if I'm lucky enough for my daughter to, you know, expect a baby, I will probably be very worried as well. But instead of manifesting that worry in concern and love and all the rest of it, she became very angry. So it would be anger over the fact that I wasn't calling her all the time to tell her how I was getting on, or anger that I wasn't inviting her to every scan, or and it went on and on to the point where on the night that I went into labour, she was calling up angry that she wasn't there. Why wasn't she allowed to be with me while I was in labour? And I was like, I need to be in labour with my husband, or even on my own. Please don't get involved. And when my daughter was born, she came into the hospital and snatched my daughter away from me and didn't even look at me or say anything to me, and was just like, "Thank God your daughter's been born." Things like that are pretty extreme, and that's at the point where you start to think, this isn't right. But again, I was the first one of my friends to give birth, so even things like that, I was 50-50 about, is it normal, is it not? Because actually mum is very anxious, and maybe this is how she manifests her anxiety. So it's very difficult to pinpoint a single thing that says, you know, this is how, you know, the autism manifested itself. It became more obvious as she became older and had more problems as she got older with her mental health.
And nowadays, I mean, that diagnosis of autism is more more widely accepted. What are the things? I mean, again, what are the things that might signify to someone that their parents were or are autistic, if it's a spectrum? What sort of behaviors might let them know that their parent, uncle, father wasn't just a difficult person, but might actually have been on the autistic or quite high on the autistic spectrum?
I think things like it does come down to sort of needing to control what they perceive as chaos. So it might be repeating the same routine absolutely down to the last detail of how many times they turn off a switch before they leave the house, or how many times they check every room before they leave. It might be wearing not necessarily exactly the same clothes every day, but the same sort of clothes, not liking things being too tight, so preferring looser fabrics or certain types of fabrics. There are certain fabrics that mum couldn't bear on her skin. But again, you know, that on its own you don't sort of think of. So it's an accumulation of things. For mum, it was also she couldn't bear taking a shower. And so she didn't want us to have a shower physically in the house for many years. And my father eventually broke her down because he liked showers. So he eventually had one put in. But we realized later it's because she couldn't bear the sensation of the water on her skin. It was like multiple needles. So there are lots of sensory things that autistic people struggle with. Lots of noise. So going into a restaurant, for example, where the acoustics aren't great, that can affect a lot of us. But for an autistic person, they can't concentrate on what you're saying to them because there's so much other noise going on that they just can't focus at all. Certain types of food, textures, again, it's lots of sensory stuff. And then needing to know what's going to happen and when, which is one of the reasons mum needed us to call all the time. Because there's a theory that autistic people don't have what some people call theory of mind, in that they can't put themselves in another person's shoes. And that is quite worrying, because then they'll tend to sort of catastrophize. So if you've said, I'm going to be home at 6, and you're not home until 6:15 because you got stuck in traffic, by the time you walk through the door, many autistic people will have already decided that you're dead, obviously. Yeah.
Well, we all do that to an extent, don't we?
Exactly. Well, this is the thing. A lot of things are done to an extent, but if you put them all together, those are a lot of the traits, I would say.
Right, right.
But also lots of positive things. So being good at recognizing patterns and remembering patterns. So mum was phenomenally good at bridge. She was really good at languages, not particularly good at speaking them because she didn't really have the confidence, but she was very good at remembering vocabulary, learning grammar, remembering dates. She was fantastic at history. She loved cricket. She understood all the rules of cricket inside out and back to front. So there are lots of sort of positive things that go with this as well. I wouldn't want it to come across as solely a negative.
No. But it's only, obviously, we're thinking more and more nowadays, aren't we? Obviously, being the joyful environmentalist, I have Greta as one of my mentors, and she's very good at waving the flag for the positive things of autism. And Chris Packham, obviously, another extremely brilliant example of positive. But I suppose in this context, we're talking about the difficulty of being raised by an autistic parent, and when moving forward a little bit. So when was it that? Oh, that's right. So please explain the difficulties that you had in trying to find out what was wrong with your mother as she became more difficult as she got older.
Yeah. Well, it was mainly because her mental health seemed to be deteriorating. Her anxiety levels were increasing exponentially, so that she got very, very worried about leaving the house to do anything. And it was really impacting on my father, who had retired and was trying to enjoy doing nice things together and going on holiday and things like that, or just going out with friends. She would get extremely anxious about what to wear, what she was going to talk about, how they were going to get there, whether the house was going to be safe, things that, again, we're all worried about. But these anxieties really ratcheted up to the point where in about 2013, my uncle phoned me, and he said he'd just been on holiday with my mum and dad, and he was very worried about my mum because she just seemed almost, he said, at the point of exhaustion. And my uncle was a GP, so he was sort of looking at this from the point of view of being her brother, but also worrying about her medically. And he said, I think she needs to go into respite, and I think your dad's exhausted as well. And it came as a bit of a shock, because I lived sort of a 4-hour drive away from my parents, and although I saw them fairly regularly, maybe once a month, maybe more than that sometimes, I had just seen mum as just becoming more mum. I hadn't really seen, because my dad had been just saying we're fine, and seemed to be coping. I hadn't really seen it for what it was. And mum had been going to see a psychiatrist about her anxiety. She also, throughout her life, had suffered with bouts of depression anyway. This sounds very callous, but it was kind of part of who she was. So I hadn't seen it I hadn't realised it had got as bad as it had. And then what really precipitated everything was that she became obsessed with cleaning, to the point that she tried to clean the oven with caustic soda without wearing any gloves, and she gave herself 3rd-degree burns. And mum and dad just sort of dealt with it as if she'd, you know, got a splinter in her thumb, and just didn't really tell me, and just she burnt her hand. But mum phoned my cousin and sort of dropped it into the conversation in a very high octane sort of way, which alerted my cousin to something going wrong. And at that point my uncle said, I think you better go and see them and see what's going on. And when I arrived at the house, it was like stepping through the mirror into Wonderland. It was just the weirdest situation. Mum was sort of running around the house, like, and kept saying, there's a massive crack in the ceiling, the walls are going to fall down, the whole house is falling down, the place is filthy, haven't got anything to eat, there's nothing in the fridge. And she was talking on this sort of manic loop, and it was very, very frightening. And to cut a long story short, we had to take her to A&E to get assessed, because we couldn't get a psychiatric assessment done. And at that point we realized she had very severe anxiety and depression, absolutely crippling, and couldn't be left on her own. And from then on, it spiraled, really. So she was on lots of drugs. She went in and out of a mental health hospital.
One of the things I should just explain to those that about the book. One of the things that's so inspiring about the book is the struggles that Anna had with the local authorities. I mean, I think we're all familiar with this now, you know, with the services being cut and cut and cut. And if you want to get anything for anyone, you have to battle and phone and battle and phone. And could you say a little bit about, just in case anyone is in this situation now and is struggling with how to get help or assessment for a parent who's in difficulty, and any advice on how you persevered with it, because it seemed to be a battle that went on and on trying to get her the right help? Yes.
Well, I learned it took a long time to get the answers I needed, but I learned what I needed to know from Age UK in the end. I phoned, luckily I had a contact there through a friend, but I phoned Age UK and was given all this vocabulary, which was like being given a golden key to unlock the social services that we needed, because by that time my mum had been in and out of mental institutions, and my father was dying from cancer. And the hospital where my father was trying to discharge him into the care of my mentally ill mother. And my mentally ill mother was saying that her husband, who was dying of cancer, was her carer. But she wasn't saying carer. She was just saying, my husband's going to look after me. And my dad was saying, well, my wife's going to look after me. And I kept saying to the hospital, my dad's dying of cancer and my mother's mentally ill. And they kept going, yes, but they want to look after each other. And so eventually Age UK gave me the magic key, because they said, what you have to say is, my parents are both vulnerable adults. Which is a phrase, apparently, which people sit up and go, oh, we better listen. It's no good saying my parents are both sick and old. You have to say my parents are vulnerable adults. And as soon as I said that, I almost heard the person on the other end of the phone, you know, go, my parents are vulnerable adults, and my father, who is dying, is my mother's carer. And at that point, a lot of things fell into place. So then I was able to access continuing care. I can't remember all the phrases now, but even
can I ask, Anna, when you say Age UK, is that Age Concern? Is that a different charity? Just for
Age UK is different. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure other charities could also help in a similar way.
No, I'm just literally wanting to write that down for people that might be, you know, literally age.uk, I guess.
Age UK, one word, I think. Age, and then capital U, capital K, all one word.
Okay.
Yeah. And they gave me all sorts of other information, like, you know, if you're about to be discharged from hospital, then they have to do a Section 2 assessment, I think that's right, initially, and then possibly a Section 5 if you need particular equipment. There were all these little codes and names of things that, as soon as I mentioned them, I was put through to the right person in social services, and was able to access more help, and also able to make the point that my father wasn't ready to be discharged and my mother needed looking after, and that sort of thing. And also writing everything down, that was the most important thing the Age UK person told me to do. He said, keep a paper trail of absolutely everything. And when it came to, my mother actually had to be sectioned in the end. And the reason we got her sectioned was because I'd been keeping a paper trail of everything that had gone on between her and her psychiatrist, as far as I knew. And I had lots of written testimonies from friends of the family who were also concerned as well. So we went into the hospital with a massive folder of papers saying, this is the reality. Please don't fob us off anymore.
Yes, and you also had difficulty with psychiatrists fobbing you off and patronising you and dismissing your concerns, didn't you?
Well, there was one in particular, sadly, who he just kept saying, I can't, well, he didn't even speak to me. He told his secretary to tell me he couldn't speak to me because of data protection. And even the GP that I spoke to said, well, that's not right, because you should be, he can't tell you what your mother has said to him, but he should be able to talk to you about the situation.
Right,
And
right.
I got, and I ended up talking to a friend who is a psychiatrist and getting lots of phrases from him that I could then use to back up my argument.
Yeah. I think maybe let's talk about compassion a little bit, because I was very impressed when I read your book at the levels of compassion that you were able to show, whilst it's obviously very difficult when we're dealing with very difficult people, especially when they don't want us to and they perceive us as interfering or they perceive us as threatening. Do you have anything to say about compassion?
Well, it's funny.
Did you learn, or how would you define compassion, and how do you feel the experience of looking after your mother enriched your capacity to be compassionate?
From the point of view of the definition, I find it really interesting whenever, this is going to sound so pompous to people who've not met me, so I apologize, but both my parents were classicists, and they taught me long words as a little girl by explaining to me where the words came from. So I learnt compassion as a word by learning that it means to suffer with, because com is with in Latin, and passion comes from a Latin word which means suffer. So from a very young age, I learned that it meant compassion means to suffer with somebody else. And so that's always been my understanding of it. But actually chatting to Marty, I think it was last week, and then also doing a little bit of Googling, I realized that it's quite interesting to look at the difference or the link between empathy and compassion, which I think they sometimes get sort of muddled together. Empathy, as far as I know, is you feel somebody else's suffering almost as if it's your own in some cases. But you don't necessarily do anything with that. You just end up feeling as bad as the other person. Whereas if you feel empathy and then you move to compassion, then in compassion you are doing something about that person's suffering.
Right. Let me ask Marty that question, just because I don't know if you ask this regularly in this workshop, but obviously there are some people here that might not have attended a different workshop. But from the point of view of the Compassion Salon, do you have a definition, Marty, of compassion?
Yeah, so Anna's absolutely right in defining the difference between compassion and empathy as empathy to be with, or we often say to put our feet in someone else's shoes, which sometimes can be disabling. And also empathy is often used by torturers, so because they know the pain that something is going to cause when they fully immerse themselves in
that's
someone
a nice
else's
image
feeling.
You've got there, Marty. Very nice.
Sorry, I very
nice
much.
Image.
But we'll move swiftly on to compassion. So
yes.
Compassion is this sense of, we all have that, we're all born with that. It's this attentiveness to suffering and the need to do something about it. So, and that's, compassion's us as well. So it's compassion is incomplete if we're not, looking after ourselves. And the next step in that, there's another step in compassion, which is noticing the suffering of others and ourselves, and then having the wisdom and often courage to then relieve it. And sometimes that's not doing anything. Sometimes that's just being with someone, sitting with someone. A good example, for example, about wisdom and courage would be a firefighter or a nurse or a doctor who needs to administer a medication to someone, and often they need to jump out of empathy and able to, to help. So, yeah.
Right. And there must have been times, Anna, during those long struggles that you felt like screaming, and you must have, forgive me for saying so, but you must have hated your mother at times because she caused so much difficulty for you and the family. Did you feel that?
I did before she got very sick, but by the time she was very sick, she was so childlike actually that
Right.
it was very, well, I wouldn't say it was easy, but there was one particular time, for example, when she was really agitated and I had to keep taking her out for walks to burn off some of the energy. And she was obsessed with washing. It was after she'd burnt her hand, actually. She was obsessed with washing her hair, and she wasn't allowed to get her hand wet. And she hated showers. She always had her hair washed she washed her own hair, obviously, in a basin with a cup, the same cup that she'd used for 30 odd years. And in the end, I said, I'll wash your hair for you. And in doing it, I just had this, I can't really explain it without using some cliched words, but I almost had this sort of epiphany of, I've got to be your mother now. You know, it was just, I could see that the skin of her scalp was so fragile and so soft, and it was so odd doing that for her, because she used to bend my head over that same basin and use the same cup to wash my hair. And we went for a walk afterwards, and my mother was not a religious woman at all. She was a complete atheist, and she said, I lift my eyes to the hills. And I said, oh, that's a psalm, Mum. I think the next line is, from whence cometh help, or something like that. I'm not very good at remembering Bible verses, but I think that's what it is. And we ended up having this very strange conversation where she was saying, where is God, where is God? And she, you know, she'd never been religious. And I said, well, I just think if there is a God, it's in what we do to help one another. And I've just washed your hair, and Jesus washed people's feet. And, you know, all this rubbish was coming out of my, it felt like rubbish. But I think that's the moment of compassion that I can really pinpoint. But I mean, there were others, obviously. But I think the absolute hardest one was when I got a call from a social worker saying, please, will you be, well, they don't ask you, but they, you know, your mother needs to go to be admitted under the Mental Health Act, and you have to be her nearest relative because your father's not in a fit state to sign the document. And I had to basically sign the warrant for my mother's arrest to be put in under section for 20 days. Yes. And I knew it was the right and compassionate thing to do, but it felt horrendous. So that was a different example of compassion in action, I suppose.
I have another question, because I have always believed, and you know, we could discuss this for another 3 hours, but obviously we're not going to, but I've always believed that people do the best they can with the knowledge and awareness and understanding that they have at the time. And when you really think that through, in fact, I might write it later because I found it so helpful. I'll write it later in the chat. That particular sentence, when you really think that through, in the case of, I'm speaking now to all the listeners, to people that have harmed you, that people do the best they can with the knowledge and awareness and understanding that they have at the time. That doesn't mean that they have much knowledge, awareness, and understanding often. You know, many people have people who are psychopathic, for example, you know, murderers, etc. They have no knowledge, awareness, understanding. So you've got a broad spectrum. But if you think that sentence through, then I find often you find very little, I'll get to my question in a minute. Often you find very little reason to be angry with people, because you think, well, if they really knew better, they do better. It's my own personal belief that nobody that has a child, when they're giving birth to a child, thinks, how can I fuck up this child's life? I mean, I don't think that's anybody's intention, even if that ends up being what happens. But it's very fashionable at the moment, again, a bit like I said about accusing everyone of having control issues. It's very fashionable to speak of setting boundaries. There's a lot of talk in psychoanalytic circles about setting boundaries. So for the people that are listening that perhaps have a very difficult person in their life, could you say anything about how you found the balance between having some boundaries in order to protect your own family and your own sanity, and yet at the same time not cutting off this very difficult lady?
Yeah, that's very interesting, because a lot of people did say to me before we hit absolute crisis, a lot of people said to me, you're going to have to put up some boundaries because your mum is, you know, causing too many problems in your life, basically. And eventually I did say to them both, I can't talk to you every day anymore because it's getting too much. Sometimes it was 3 times a day. And I said, I can't do this anymore because I've got 2 children to look after and a job to do, and my husband works abroad, and I can't talk to you 3 times a day and keep hearing the same problems and worries and keep trying to help you and you're not listening to me. So that was the only time that I put up a physical boundary and said, I'm not going to answer the phone 3 times a day. But then when crisis hit, which was quite soon after that, I obviously then boundaries had to go out the window because mum really needed me. And I suppose what it comes down to is that even though there were times where she had physically and mentally hurt me, I knew that she didn't mean to, and I loved her. And so that was what got me through it. And I think part of that was being brought up by my grandmother, who every time something, when she was still alive, I would speak to her sometimes every day. And when things were bad, she would say to me, Anna, I don't know what's wrong with her. She's always been like this. You just have to forgive her. And I can still hear her saying that. And I think that was, although sometimes that actually did make me quite angry because I'd think, well, I can't. It did sort of sustain me, that idea of she can't help it. Can't help it.
She was doing the best she could with the knowledge and awareness and understanding that she had at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And also her motivation, as you say, her motivations were never bad.
No.
You know, even when she was, you know, when I was at university, she sent me a letter saying, phone me now, because I hadn't been calling home. I'd been at university for a few weeks, and guess what? I hadn't phoned home. And I got this very aggressive letter, and I thought someone had died. So of course I immediately phoned home, and she absolutely tore a strip off me about, you know, not being in communication and things. But even then I knew it's because she was worried about me, and she couldn't bear the thought of me being away and her not knowing what was going on. It wasn't because she wanted to make my life difficult, you know. So even when I was angry, I still knew that, I suppose.
You see, listeners, why we've got Anna talking for the Compassion Salon tonight, don't you? Because she managed to maintain those levels of compassion and understanding. I mean, many young people in that situation would go, fuck off, mother, don't ring me for the next year. I mean, you know, many people would do that.
Well,
I mean, I wouldn't be capable of that, and I'm glad you weren't either. But I mean, I think there is very much this, you've got to look after yourself school of thought, isn't there? That I think perhaps my own feeling is perhaps we've gone too far that way as a society. That I mean, Buddhism teaches a balance in that, you know, in taking care of the other as well as taking care of the self. But obviously everyone who's listening is going to have views on this one, I'm sure. I'm wondering if we should open this to questions, or whether you'd like us to go on talking a little longer, Marty.
I would like you to go on talking for a bit longer.
Okay.
No, because it's just, I'm finding it's just a wonderful conversation. I can see from looking at the faces of people that are listening that they're hearing a lot of stuff that's important for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm trying to bear everyone in mind. Okay. So I'm trying to remember, Anna, the moments when you were, you know, when you were in the fire, as it was, with, you know, with her. I mean, as you say, what difference did the diagnosis of autism actually make when that finally came? Because you had to struggle to get that diagnosis, I know, but when it did come, was that helpful?
Yeah, it was huge. My sister and I had been going to monthly meetings because my mother, although she'd come out of section, she was still being kept in the hospital because they were worried about her. And she, by that time, she didn't really want to leave. She was sort of institutionalized. So we were going for monthly meetings with her psychiatrist, a social worker, and her legal representative. And at one of these meetings, there was a new person there that we hadn't met before. He introduced himself as a psychologist, and he was a very small, very quiet man who completely held the room. It was amazing. He just started to speak, and everybody just, you know, some people are like that, aren't they? And he said, I have read all your mother's notes, and I have read all the correspondence that you have sent in about your mother, and all the correspondence you have collated about your mother from her friends and family. And I have just been wondering whether you've ever considered that your mother might be on the autistic spectrum. And my sister and I just looked at each other and went, yes. It honestly was like one of those puzzle, it's just like doing a jigsaw puzzle where you can't find the last piece, and then you find it under the carpet and you put it in and it all comes together. And then he just started talking about various traits in her behavior, things like stimming, which some of you might have heard of, where a lot of autistic people will repeat an action to calm themselves down. So with mum, it was a constant tapping, tap, 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 tap. He asked us lots of questions. He basically took us through the autism quotient test, where you answer, as an autistic person, you do the test and you find out what your AQ score is.
Your mum was confusing though, wasn't she? Because she was so intelligent.
She was so intelligent, and actually
high functioning autism in women is quite rare, is it not?
Well, this is it. So, and he explained all this to us. So he said there was a time when mum would have been called a person with Asperger's syndrome, but now we talk about high functioning autism because we talk about the autistic spectrum. And he said, it is a bit baffling because your mum managed to go to Cambridge and came out of there with a degree which she then took to teach in a school. How did she cope with that? And I said, well, she met my dad in the first term of Cambridge and stuck by his side rigidly. She did Latin and Greek, which were just perfect for her autistic brain, because I didn't say this as articulately as this on the day, but we unpicked it all.
Yes.
She did a subject that really did use her autism to its strengths.
Yes.
She got a job in the school where she had been a pupil, teaching alongside teachers that had taught her, and the timetable hadn't actually changed that much since she'd left. So she was living at home as well until she got married. So she went straight from her parents' home.
Very interesting.
Her dad.
Very interesting.
She had a lot of order, and my dad facilitated an awful lot of her things. And he even said to me before he died that he thought the reason that his mum and my mum didn't get on very well is because they were actually peas in a pod. And my cousin has since said, I wonder whether grandma was autistic. This is my other grandmother, not the one.
So this is very interesting again, because I'm thinking of people listening. So anyone that is dealing with someone that is autistic, if they've not considered this, it's very much what your mother did so wisely was to find out all the strengths, wasn't it, and to order her life accordingly. And autistic people would have done that, and people that know they've got autistic parents have probably considered this already. But if people haven't done that, or they haven't done it for their parents, then it's obviously a very positive way forward to turn all those negatives to positives in caring for someone that's like this.
I think the added the added issue with women and girls with autism is that they are better at masking their autism than men, which is something that has become talked about a lot more in recent months, actually, with Melanie Sykes talking about her autism, and Holly Smale, and Christine McGuinness, who was on a brilliant program about her children who were all autistic, and then she realized through their diagnoses that she is as well. And autistic women are very good at sort of watching how other people behave and then copying it. But the fallout from that is it is absolutely exhausting, because it is like being on stage all the time. And I look back and I think of my poor mum, who, she would try on 3 different outfits before going to pick us up from anything. I watched her do it when she had to go and pick my sister up from things, and I think, why is she changing her clothes so often? And then at the school gate, she would be the most gregarious, charismatic person, laughing, joking, chatting with everyone. And then she'd come home and she'd be utterly furious, break things, hit us, scream. And you look back and think, she was shattered. She was having a total meltdown. She couldn't cope with any of this acting, being this woman that she wasn't. It was all horrific. And then she would mentally replay everything afterwards, and she'd say, oh, that woman said that to me, and that mum said that, and I don't think they like me, and blah, blah, blah. And her brain was on absolute overdrive. And a lot of autistic women and girls have this. I know now, because I've spoken to an awful lot of them since writing the book.
And Anna, what do you think of the long-term effects on you of having had all those years of of needing to be compassionate, you know, every single day? I mean, has it made you on a very short thread now? I'm basically any friends that are difficult in the diary, they can just fuck off. Anybody that you don't like, delete. Don't want any of them in my life. You know, it's easy people only. Thank you very much. You can all go away. I mean, have you used up your compassion quotient for the rest of your life, do you think?
I have to be careful what I say because some of my friends are here.
I was thinking if someone comes to you with an essay, with a problem with their essay, you can go, sort the essay out, problem out yourself, you stupid student.
No. What are the effects on me? I think I've got some learnt behavior from being brought up by an autistic woman. So I mean, my kids get frustrated with me over some of the little things that I get obsessed about. Like I can't stand watermarks anywhere. So I have to wipe the shower down every single time I use it. And that really annoys them. Stupid things like that. What else? I am terrified of confrontation. I absolutely hate confrontation. And it drives my husband mad because I quite often will go, oh, you talk to them. I can't do that. I can't handle the angry person or the difficult person. So
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was thinking that having been through years of difficulties, that you would kind of get to be over difficulty in general.
Yeah, I think I obviously I've had some therapy because you know you have to. The most useful thing that came out of that was my therapist. We were talking through a particular scenario, and she said, "I think you have linked in your mind anger with violence." And she said, "Not all anger leads to violence, you know." And I went, "Doesn't it?" Because I really just had got it into my head that if somebody was angry with me, something really bad was going to, you know, happen as a result.
Right.
And I've had to, and I still have to tell myself they are allowed to be angry. That's their anger. You don't have to caretake it. You don't have to even react. That's, let them have it. Go. They can go away in that corner and be angry. But I find that very hard. Yeah.
Yes, I suppose those of us that had parents that had anger, that it didn't lead to violence. I mean, my mum shouted a lot. She was a single parent. She shouted at me a lot, and we were always, and I'd shout back. And sometimes we'd run around the room shouting at each other, but it didn't lead to violence. So if someone shouts at me, I shout back. If they want to shout at me, I can shout back. Yes.
So I wasn't really allowed to shout back.
No,
so
I can see that. So we have a question here. I don't know, Marty hasn't said we can move into questions, but I've got the chat open so I can see that. And Glenn is asking, I'm wondering how your mother's workplace in education would be supporting someone like your mum today. And I'm keen to hear how you feel workplace culture needs to evolve as we move forward with greater awareness of neurodiversity. You teach in university, Anna, don't you? So what's your experience of this now?
I don't know from the point of view of the teacher, and that is so interesting. From the point of view of students, there's a lot more help given. You can get extra time in exams, you can get help with equipment that you might need, like a laptop or something. I always, if somebody tells me that they're autistic, I will ask them what they need. So they might want to do an online session instead of face-to-face. They might want to send me work in advance rather than just come in and talk. There are lots of things we can do to listen to what they need. I would have thought from the point of view of a teacher, they might need more time to prepare for things, or more breaks, because it's so exhausting, you know, standing up in front of class. But I think it's always just about listening, you know, just asking people, what do you need, and seeing what can be done. And I know it's not always possible, because I know schools are really, really pushed as it is, but certainly from the point of view of, because I used to teach a class of 28, and it was in an institution where there were a lot of students with learning needs, and I would always try and ask them what they needed, and maybe do a bit of one-to-one with them in a break or after the class if they needed to talk out, you know, because particularly I teach creative writing, and there is this very old-fashioned way of teaching that we're trying to break out of the mold of, where you run a workshop, so you have people reading their work and listening to a critique from the rest of the class.
Oh, I hate that.
Autistic kids cannot deal with that. they just can't deal with
I
it.
don't see why anyone would have to deal with that. Who wants
Well, I
to put
know.
out a poem they've written and then, oh, let's have 29 people complain and criticize it? No, thank you.
I know. Well, we could do a whole other thing on that, but yeah, no, I agree. But yeah, so trying to find out what people need, I think, is the short answer to that.
Lucy's asking a very good question, which I completely forgot to ask. Which is what was it like to? She says that she loved your book and that it's wonderful listening to you talk. And what was it like to actually write the book? I wondered that too. I'm like, oh my God, how did she write this book?
Well, it started.
Did you have to manage the reactions and feelings of your other family members, and how did you take care of yourself while you were writing that?
Yes.
Re-traumatizing yourself going through all that.
Yes. Very good question. So it started off as in my journals, because I've kept journals ever since I was 7, and the reason I have always kept journals is because the way I have always coped with life is to write it down, because if I can write out my feelings or my worries or whatever, I can deal with them better rather than letting them go around my head. And I worked that out as a strategy very young. I didn't know anyone else did it. I just thought that was just me. But anyway, so I wrote during, usually I get through a notebook like this, quite a slim notebook, in sort of 6 months. But during the time when my parents were ill, I got through much fatter notebooks in a matter of weeks, because I was writing everything down, and I would write down conversations that we'd had, all the medication that everyone was taking, everything. So I had a book. It was just in a notebook, and I didn't realize. But even after that, I didn't think I was going to write a book. I started writing a blog. And the reason I started writing a blog is because I wanted to commemorate the day that my dad told me his cancer was terminal. So I started writing it a year after that day. And I realized that the reason I was doing that is because I had a lot of friends who it turned out actually weren't so much friends when I was going through trouble, who didn't seem to understand what it was I was going through. And again, I felt if I can write it in a way that people understand, then I might get through to these people. And then other writers started reading it, and they said, I hope this is going to be a book. There's something in this. But it was very difficult because I didn't know whose story I was telling. I didn't know if I was telling my story, my dad's story, our family story. And it wasn't, sadly, until Mum died that I realized it was actually her story. So there were lots of stages. There was a lot of grief that went into it, and it had to be edited multiple times so that it didn't sound too angry.
It didn't sound too angry, not by the time I read it anyway.
Good, because it was initially.
And Lucy asks, did you have to manage the reactions and feelings of your other family members?
Yeah, so I was very aware of that. So my dad and my mum had died by the time I wrote the book. But I sent the full manuscript to my husband, my kids, my sister, and my uncle, my mother's brother. They're all people who feature very highly in it, and also the people I'm most close to and was worried about. And any other family members who are mentioned aren't mentioned by name, and they're only alluded to. So I said to them, if there's anything in this that you don't want me to write, or if you don't want me to send it out, I won't send it out. I just needed to do it. And they were all absolutely effusive about it and said, please do it. It's really important. Other people need to read it. This is really interesting. My uncle changed a couple of things that he didn't change things. He suggested that I needed to talk to him a bit more about certain scenes that had happened before I was born. So we had a bit of back and forth over those. My sister corrected me because I got a kind of wine wrong. That was the only correction she made.
Oh, that's hysterical.
And my husband asked me to remove one thing that he was about him. That's fine. I got rid of that. And my kids were fine with it. So actually I was very lucky. But I instinctively knew I had to send it to them before I had made any commitment to myself to get it published. Because if I had it accepted by an agent or a publisher, then sent it to them, I would have been too attached to the idea of getting it published.
Yes, that's what I did with my ex-husband, the latter. But all I did is accuse him of Slipperman, of being called Slipperman, and watching too much cricket and being rather boring. So I didn't have to worry too much about that. Jill is asking, she says, a difficult question. I haven't read your book, so I hope you don't mind. Were you ever fearful for your mum's life? And if yes, what impact did that have on you?
Yes. particularly, so when was it? Mum did try to take her own life before Dad died. She knew Dad was probably going to die before her, and she couldn't bear the thought of that. So they came back from a weekend with us, and she took all her medication. And then I only knew because she'd left her umbrella behind. So I phoned up to say you've left your umbrella behind, because I knew that she'd be upset, because she only ever had this one umbrella that was very important to her. And my dad answered the phone. He said, oh, well, I don't think she's going to be needing it for the moment because she's in the hospital. And I said, what? And he sounded so calm. And he said, yes, she came back from yours and took all her pills. And it was awful because he was obviously in shock and trying to protect me. But I was furious with him because he just sounded so calm. I wanted, in all of the dramas, I wanted everyone to be screaming. I just couldn't understand why everyone wasn't as hysterical as I was feeling inside. So I was furious, and I was actually really angry with her as well. And then I was obviously really worried about her because she was then discharged with yet more pills. And I phoned the GP and said, how can you send somebody home? How can they send her home with more pills? She's just going to take them again. And they said, well, we've judged that she has mental capacity to understand what she's done, that she won't do it again. And that made me furious as well. But I mean, with hindsight, I look back and I understand why everything was dealt with in the way it was. But at the time, I was just angry and frightened. Yeah.
I have to say, from my memory of the book, Jill, that this example of Anna being angry was basically constant, wasn't it, for a long time? But it was mainly anger with the psychiatrist, anger with the authorities, anger with the social services, anger with the visitors. I mean, there was not a lot of really effective help coming through at that stage. There was lots for you to be angry about.
I think one of the main problems as well is because Mum was 70, she was classed as geriatric and therefore wasn't given the same immediacy of care that she might have got if she'd been younger. And I was actually told that by one of the mental health nurses.
Good grief.
Yeah.
Marty, are you ready for some questions now? I mean, I've been taking some, but
that's okay. You're doing an absolutely brilliant job. Jane can field some questions as well. I just want to say a couple of things. Firstly, I want to say to Anna, thank you for sharing all this with us. It's such a brave account, and I said before we sort of came into this salon room that I read the last chapter on a train coming back from, I think, Bristol a few days ago, and my partner said to me, "Are you all right?" And I had tears rolling down my face. So just the I don't know, the beautiful way that you wrote about and harrowing way that you wrote about witnessing the death of your father really moved me. And I know that Jill Cox is here this evening. I can see her in a little box above my screen, and she's a previous Salonista who spoke about her work and her own loss, and she's written a book called Moments of Meaning. And I can see that she's very much, been feeling a lot of what you have been saying, and a lot of us relate to many of the things that it's difficult to talk about maybe. But I just want to say thank you for your honesty and also the bravery in which you wrote. I felt that I really felt that those moments for you. And I suppose I want to ask, people always say to me when you go through traumatic or difficult time and this fight with institutions and this ability to find the right language to use so people will listen to you, and it's so harrowing and so exhausting. And I think sometimes people will say, oh, you'll come through the other end and you'll be a better person and you'll have learned so much. So I suppose what I want to ask you, Anna, is, are you a better person? Or a worse person?
That's the polite way of asking the same question I asked. And I said, are you just more likely to tell people to fuck off now that you've been through all that?
I've given the opposite question, the opposite side.
Oh, I don't think I'm better or worse. I just think I
just more exhausted.
what can I say about
I
it?
mean, where are you now? You know, I think
feel
someone's
like
asked there
I feel
about,
like I've learned a lot of important things that I want to pass on to people. So actually recently, a colleague was going through a similar thing, and I just immediately just fired off a one-line text and said, I have been there. If you need to ask any questions, get in touch. And then we had quite a lot of back and forth where I told her all the magic words, and they made a massive difference. So there's that.
you've become wise.
No, I haven't become wise. I do feel a lot older suddenly. It seemed to happen almost overnight. I just suddenly had lost both my parents, both my kids had left home, and I just thought, oh, I'm now one of the elders. What the
Yes.
you know? And I remember at my mum's funeral, I went into the loo in Pizza Express, and I went to wash my hands and realised I had my younger sister, my younger cousin, my niece and my cousin's daughter all in a row. And there I was, the flipping matriarch, and I just looked at myself in the mirror and thought, no, thank you. I don't want that.
We
Don't
hear
have
you.
to do that role.
Oh, so I do feel that. But actually, I'll tell you the good thing that's come out of it is, as a teacher, I do now feel that I can own it. Whereas I think when did mum die? 7 years ago, whenever it was I first started teaching, probably 10 years ago, I did have massive imposter syndrome about being a teacher. And I used to think, well, what have I got to offer? And now I sit there with these 20-year-olds and I think, I've been there. So maybe that, but maybe that's just
Oh, wiser. Good.
There's two more questions here, Anna. Jane is asking, have you been able to grieve for who your mother was? However you would interpret that.
Yeah, I still am grieving for mum. And it hits me at unexpected times. And I think, again, that's to do with me getting older. So going through the menopause, for example, mum had a horrendous time in the menopause. And I wish I could now just give her a hug and say, I really get it now. So there are little things not little, there are things like that just hit me every so often where I just think, oh, I wish I could tell you I understand now, because I didn't
Yeah, it's back to
know.
people do the best they can with the knowledge and awareness and understanding that they have at the time, isn't it?
Yeah.
And interestingly, that links to the next question, because I love the way this has been asked. You said you've met lots of women and girls with autism after writing the book. What's been the most important thing you've learned from them?
I think listening and trying to understand their point of view, how they're feeling in that moment, how not dismissing even the smallest thing. So somebody in my family we've since discovered is autistic, and understanding that even a certain fabric is just a no-no is a big thing. And I think probably a few years ago I just thought, oh, for goodness sake, just put the jumper on and shut up. And now I'm like, no, not that jumper, or not that seat, or not that light in their eyes, or whatever it is. Yeah, being a bit more understanding, I think.
Very good, very good.
Let me just ask.
Oh, we've got now, as soon as we start to think we'll wrap up, we're going to have another 20 questions. On reflection, where did your father's coping strategies come from, do you think, may I ask? I have to say, Theo, that when you read Anna's book, if you haven't already read it, you all fall in love with Anna's father. He is the unsung hero of the book. I mean, at least he's not really unsung, is he? He's absolutely the hero of the book, because he just loves this in sometimes very, very difficult woman from when he met her at university till her death. I mean, in just an extraordinary way. He was just constancy itself, wasn't he? So where did your father's coping strategies come from, do you think? Straight from heaven, I'd say they must have come.
Well, from love. I mean, that might sound woo-woo to some people, but I mean, it was love in its absolutely most visceral way. I don't mean it in a floaty, lovey, romantic way. He loved her inside out and back to front. He loved her. He would have gone to the ends of the earth for her, and when she was under section and couldn't be with him in his final days, he by then had only one leg and he was sitting in a wheelchair, and the Macmillan nurse came round and she said, what can I do for you? And she meant with drugs and stuff. And he said, I just want Jilly back. I just miss her more than words can say. And yeah, so
bless him,
yeah,
bless him.
Yeah, love. That was it. That was absolutely it. Yeah.
Love.
If we can only all be loved like that. God bless your dad. How are we doing, Anna? Was we supposed to be finishing at 8?
What time is it?
I mean,
No,
sorry,
no.
Marty.
No, you can. We can go on till 8:30 if there's any more questions.
How wonderful.
I think Jane has a question actually, if you can
Go
ask
for it.
one. So I posed the question about I don't know, can you hear me okay? Because I'm speaking through Marty's microphone. About I suppose like both my parents have passed away, and both of them had sort of my dad had Alzheimer's and my mum had Parkinson's. So you kind of, it was over many, many years that you realize you kind of lose that person. And I just wondered, was that something you kind of went through with your mum? And then have you kind of then grieved for the person who she was? Like for me, I remember like with my dad, you lose somebody so gradually that you don't have this big, it is still shocking at the end, but it was almost like a year later where I was like, I remembered who he was. And that was, it wasn't a year later, but I had a dream. I remember having this dream, and it was like what he was like when he was well. And I just wondered, have you had anything like that, or how did with your mum and stuff?
Yeah. Gosh, well, two things there. So mum was a great mum when I was a kid. You know, she might have been strict, but she was absolutely brilliant because she provided absolute love and safety. And it was only, as I say, later on that things got difficult. So there was this amazing moment in her medication journey where she was given a drug called pregabalin, and for about 6 months she became just the best that she could be in all regards. She was suddenly everything that was loving about her, everything that was giving about her. You know, we went to see her and she'd cooked this amazing meal that was exactly like the sort of meal she would have cooked 15 years before. And it was almost too much. And my dad took me to one side and he said, I've got her back. And I remember calling my uncle, just saying, this is it. They found it. They found the magic pill, you know, to give her. And he said, I'm really sorry, Anna, but it's not going to last, because pregabalin has a wearing off effect, which is like a step down. So she'll be fine, and then she'll suddenly get worse, and then she'll plateau and it'll be okay, and then she'll suddenly get worse. And he was right. And he said, and the steps get smaller and more closer together as the decline. And it's so cruel. But I went to talk to a reader in our local church who was a nurse and a wonderful man, and I told him about it, and he said well, he was a Christian, so his view was, you know, God has given you a vision of your mum as she really is, and you've got to hold on to that. And so in the darkest hours, that is what I've always held on to, because I do know that is what she was underneath everything, underneath the drugs, underneath the autism, underneath everything. That is the woman she was, and we all knew it and recognized it when we saw it. So although it was sort of cruel, it was also amazing. So that's really helped. And then the dreams, oh my goodness. So I still sometimes get very disturbing dreams where mum is happy and amazing and alive and young and beautiful, and she's saying, I'm better now, you can take me home. But I in the dream am going, no, I can't, because you're really, really sick and I've sold your house. And it's just horrible. It's really horrible. So I very rarely get a nice dream where we're just united and happy. I have all my guilt sort of face to face with her being wonderful. So yeah, I don't like those dreams very much.
They may shift, Anna.
I hope so.
They may shift. There might be a moment when something happens in your unconscious, and some other part of you understands that you haven't sold a house, when, you know, it might shift. And that's my wish for you anyway, that you're able to sit down and have a conversation with her in your dreams, where you can just sit and talk in the sunshine and have a beautiful dream of being with her.
Thank you.
Can I just say as well, and I don't want to be at danger of making everyone tear up, which we already are, because this is so real and so wonderful to hear this honesty. But I just want to say, I know most definitely, and I'm sure you do too, that both your parents would be so very proud of what you have achieved in this work and writing it down, and the support for so many other people in terms of the things that you have to say that people may not have even thought about, and even using the language like capacity, and it's just so helpful, and vulnerable adult, and that can make it's such a small thing but has such a massive impact, just changing language slightly. So thank you for
does someone have to be officially labeled a vulnerable adult? Do they have to get a diagnosis that they're a vulnerable adult, or can we just describe people in that way?
No, if you call, if you can use it as well with children that you're worried about. If you say they're a vulnerable child or a vulnerable adult, yeah, or vulnerable teenager, yeah, that's the language that you use for safeguard.
Yeah, and people assume that you've got that from a medical or health professional when you say it, so that's quite clever. They assume that it's come from somebody else, and it's a red flag. So
yeah, it is.
Yeah, no, I realise. I'm just wondering whether
Yeah.
you have to have any official permission to wave that red flag, or you just wave it.
No, you just say it.
Wave it anyway.
Yeah.
Wave it.
Okay, one final question, because I always like to help out Lighthouse Books and Anna, and so how do you feel why should people buy your book? Sorry, that's a really, really naff question, but you know, we live in a world where we need to sell books and we need people to read them, because enriching as this conversation is, it's not nearly as enriching as reading Anna's book, I assure you.
Well, I think hopefully because it might make a difference to you or someone you know who's in a similar situation. I was reluctant to have the label autism on the front of the book initially, because I thought it might put people off, because I think it's a lot more, it's more about, I hope more broadly, about caring for elderly parents and what it's like to be in middle age yourself and balancing looking after children and working and looking after elderly parents. So I'm hoping it will be helpful to people in that regard. And also the main reason I started to write the blog was because I felt at the time that there wasn't very much written about grief and death. I think actually now there is more, but I felt like I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't even recognize my grief to start with, because it was anger. And I just, you know, I couldn't cry to start with. My sister was in floods of tears all the time, and I was just effing and blinding and screaming. So if I can help anyone to see that they're not alone, then that would be amazing.
Very good. We've got another question. Glenn wants to know, can I ask if the term vulnerable adult can be used to safeguard people with mental health concerns in the workplace?
Yes, I think so. I mean, my understanding of the training that I've had with safeguarding at university is that, yes.
Use it, Glenn. Try, see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? Any last minute questions that you're burning to ask?
Kim could listen to you both for hours. So if we could do another 3 hours.
I just always wonder, is there someone who's been bursting to ask a question but hasn't quite plucked up the courage? Go on.
Let's see.
You can write it in the chat and then no one will know it's you.
I keep
well, actually, I will know
nice
it's you.
Thank yous pop up. Thank you to the thank yous. I can't read the chat and talk at the same time. Sorry.
Oh, well, Jill Cox says she'll be reading your book, Anna. So we have a sale. Yay!
And then Anna, you have to read Jill's.
Yes. Well, I'm reading one of Isabel's at the moment. Amazing, I have to say, the Battersea Park Road to Enlightenment, and I have already read The Joyful Environmentalist, which I love.
Okay.
That's my favourite one.
We can all buy each other's books. That would be great.
Well, we particularly want to support the Lighthouse, the independent Lighthouse bookshop that Mary mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's us.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, everyone. Anna, honestly, so inspiring and such a wonderful salon. Thank you to everyone that has contributed. And we'll save the chat and send it to you both so that you can so that you can see it. So thank you very much for being here, Isabel. Always a pleasure. Always. Thank you so very much, and thank you to Jane, who's next to me here. And Holly, and all our Salonistas that are here every time, and everyone that's saying thank you. We really appreciate, the salon really appreciates your support as well. So thank you so very much.
Anna, what's your Instagram?
Oh, at AC Wilson Writer.
I don't understand Instagram, I'm sorry.
I think I might have made it private, but if I'll recognize your name and let you in if you want to follow me.
Oh, what's the point of an author having a private Instagram?
I know. Well, I'll see you later, Isabel.
Oh dear. Thank you very much for inviting us to the Compassion Salon. It's been a really wonderful. And thank you, Anna. It's a privilege to talk to you about this book always.
Thank you. Thanks for your lovely questions, Isabel. And thank you, Marty.
Thank you so much. Take care. Speak soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.